Welcome to Magic Arcanum, I'm Ryan Gomez, and I'm so glad you're here because it's story time. And what a story time this is gonna be. But first, as is our custom now, let me start by saying thank you. The 20 episodes of Magic Arcanum we've done already have accumulated 1 million views. I still read every comment, and I want to stay true to the original vision of Magic Arcanum, to create a community of players who love to hear the stories behind their favorite game. I hope you all stay with me for another 1 million. All right, mushy stuff out of the way, let's talk about why we're here today. For a while now, we've been building up to something big happening on Ravnica. We've got Nicol Bolas, who has put his minions into key positions, and he's acquired some very powerful artifacts that are gonna let him bring his army of eternal zombies over to the plane. There, he will battle the Gatewatch and their allies in what we know will be called the War of the Spark. It's still unclear what exactly Nicol Bolas hopes to achieve by invading the plane, but it seems unlikely that everyone's gonna survive the coming conflict. So today, we are taking a look at my predictions for who lives and who dies in War of the Spark. Before we get started, a quick word on spoilers. Very little is known about War of the Spark right now, but I expect that to change quite rapidly, maybe even before this video is published. For today though, I'm deliberately avoiding any secondhand information or unconfirmed leaks, stuff like that. All of my guesses are based on what we actually know in public today. Which means, first, I need to knock out a few easy ones. Chandra, odds of death, 0. She's got her own comic book series now, which takes place after the events of War of the Spark, so we know she survives the coming battle. Also in this first issue of her comic, a Johnny, which means his odds of death are also 0. So that confirms 2 members of the Gatewatch at least survive, but they don't necessarily win. Also, small spoiler for the comic, Tybalt arrives at the last panel of the first issue, so he survives too, although I was not expecting him to really be part of the war anyway. With those 3 freebies out of the way, the rest become much harder. Let's do them alphabetically. Angrath, odds of death, 0. We met this Minotaur planeswalker back on Ixalan. He was trapped there for a really long time before finally getting free again and going straight home to see his 2 darling daughters. That probably means he's gonna stay put for a while, and I don't think we'll see him in War of the Spark at all. Arlen Cord, odds of death, 0. We haven't seen her since Eldritch Moon, and she's got her hands full right now mopping up after Emrakul's visit to the plane. I think she's safe. Ashiok, odds of death, 0. We haven't seen them since Theros. They've been kind of missing in action since then, and it would be weird for them to show up on Ravnica without anything to actually gain there, so I'm gonna say they're probably safe. Dak, odds of death, 0. He was last seen entering the underworld of Theros, which probably means they're saving him for the next big story arc. I think he is safe as well. Daretti, odds of death, 0. He's a goblin, but he's really wrapped up in the politics of Fiora, so I don't think we'll see him appear on Ravnica at all. Davriel, odds of death, 0. This is a new Planeswalker character that they just introduced a few months ago in a novella, and he's really cool. I can't wait for him to get a card, but I do not think it will be War of the Spark. Domri, odds of death, 2 out of 3. He's currently leading the Gruul clans and working for Nicol Bolas to upset the general life on Ravnica, but nobody stays on top of the Gruul clans for long, and he's in a color combination that's already getting kind of crowded, and we've got 3 Domri Planeswalker cards altogether now. So if the Gatewatch doesn't get him, Rurik Thar still might. Dovin, odds of death, I'm gonna say 3 out of 3. I think he has used up all of his usefulness in the story coming off of Kaladesh, and I don't see him doing much beyond Ravnica here. I think Chandra might be the one to do him in as payback for him sabotaging the heart of Kieran back during the events of Aether Revolt. Elspeth, well, this one's kind of awkward because she's already kind of dead and in the underworld on Theros, so I have to say push. Yeah, that's a gambling term for like no bet or equal bet. It's just like there's no odds there. It's just a push.
I think you might be the only one who gets that. I didn't when I read it. I knew I was going to ask you about it.
Okay, we could just leave you in asking me because they love to hear your voice. Garruk, odds of death, 0. We haven't seen him in a long time. I know he's out there in the multiverse somewhere hunting planeswalkers, but even with all of them on Ravnica, I still don't think he's gonna actually show up there. They're probably saving him for some more kind of personal-driven storyline down the road. It'd actually be kind of cool to see him hunting somebody like Arlen Cord, actually. Gideon, odds of death, 1 in 3. Gideon currently has the Black Blade Reforged, and it's one of their best weapons to use against Nicol Bolas. He already used it to kill Belzenlock back on Dominaria, and I don't think Gideon can die here. He needs to make it back to Theros to complete his own story arc, although I cannot rule it out. He might fall during the War of the Spark. Huatli, odds of death, 0. We last saw her befriending Saheeli on Kaladesh. I think it's unlikely she will actually show up on Ravnica for the War of the Spark at all. Jace, odds of death, 0. He's one of the most popular characters in the game, often serving as the very face of Magic itself. They just redid his whole persona to make him even more likable. As much as I would like to find out what happens when you kill the living Guild Pact, I cannot imagine that's actually what's going to happen here. He's safe. Jaya, odds of death, 2 in 3. She's a fan favorite from the early days of Magic, but I think she's at risk here on Ravnica. Chandra has a lot of mentor characters in her life right now between Jaya, Ajani, and her own mother back home on Kaladesh. And it's kind of hard to have 2 fire-based planeswalkers around at the same time, so I could see them letting Jaya have a sort of Obi-Wan Kenobi moment where she sacrifices herself to save Chandra or some of the other planeswalkers during War of the Spark. Jiang, odds of death, 0. He was just introduced to get the Chinese players excited about Magic the Gathering, and I don't think that they would kill off a brand new character before he's had a chance to really do anything meaningful yet. Karn, odds of death, I'll go up to 1 out of 3 here. He does want to get back to New Phyrexia and blow it up using a weapon he just dug up from Dominaria, but I could also see like Joyra begging the surviving members of the Gatewatch to go and finish Karn's uncompleted quest if he falls during the War of the Spark. Kaya, odds of death, 1 in 3. Kind of like Dovin, she's already been used up story-wise for the reason she was created, and just like Domri, she's sitting on top of a guild that has somebody else waiting in the wings to take over. But Kaya does have a unique suite of powers, and she's in a color combination that's kind of got room at the moment, so she might get to stick around. Kiora, odds of death, I think 0. She's been given the Gatewatch a pretty wide berth after the events on Zendikar, and she's in a color combination that doesn't really have a lot of other alternatives right now, so she's probably safe, although I'm not sure what they're saving her for story-wise at this point. Liliana. Oh boy, okay. Odds of death, 50-50. She's currently enslaved to Nicol Bolas, and most of the Gatewatch thinks that she betrayed them. Her demon storyline is done, but she's still holding the Chain Veil, which is a really powerful artifact, and that alone could turn the tide in her favor here. Being that she's a necromancer, I will pencil in here that maybe she dies but then is actually turned into a lich, kind of like her brother Josu back on Dominaria. This would be a really fitting and also torturous existence for somebody who prided themselves on their beauty. She would get to live forever like she wanted, but it would cost her pretty much everything. And that is perfectly black. I will also use this opportunity to drop some hot financial advice in your lap. The Planeswalker card Liliana Untouched by Death is super affordable right now, but she could go way up in value if we get some good zombie cards coming out of Nicol Bolas's Army of Eternals in War of the Spark. Now, all the cards I talk about, I've got a link for down below, so after the video, make sure you hit that up and go check those cards out, okay? Back to the Planeswalkers. Mu Yanling. Odds of death, 0. This is another one that was created for China, and she's going to be safe until she's had a chance to kind of develop her own storyline a little bit more. Nahiri. Odds of death, 1 in 3. We haven't seen her since the events of Eldritch Moon, and she's never really been interested in Ravnica, but she might know that Nicol Bolas is to blame for the Eldrazi being released on her home plane of Zendikar. So it's possible she shows up looking for revenge and gets dragged into the War of the Spark. Narset. Odds of death, 1 and 3, kind of like Nahiri, we haven't seen her in a while, and she doesn't really have anything to do with Ravnica, but she does have a loose connection to Nicol Bolas through Ugin, Sarkhan, and the events that happened on her home plane of Tarkir, so I cannot entirely rule out that she'll show up and pick sides here. Nicol Bolas, the big one. Odds of death, like 1 in 3? Odds of defeat, though, is probably 3 and 3. I don't think he can win here, but even if he loses and dies, he's died before, and that was just kind of a speed bump for him. I guess it's possible Vivian captures him in the arc bow like she wants to somehow. Or maybe his spirit gets trapped or killed by Kaya. He would also first have to lose control of the Eternals, or they would all have to be beaten, and that alone is a pretty big task. He's also got Liliana to use as a sort of human shield, for lack of a better term, and there's a lot of stuff between him and the gatewatch acting as a buffer, but if they can overcome all of that, then yeah, I think Bolas will fall. Nissa, odds of death 1 in 3. She bailed on the gatewatch to go home to Zendikar and watch over the recovery from the Eldrazi invasion. But she might want to show up and give Nicol Bolas another punch after losing to him on Amonkhet. Realistically, though, I think she's going to just sit this one out. Ob Nixilis, odds of death 1 in 3. He was technically the first bad guy the Gatewatch ever defeated, and he swore to get his revenge on them someday. And him showing up during the big fight against Nicol Bolas would be an excellent tactical move. But I think the spotlight is going to stay on Nicol Bolas, and they will save Ob Nixilis for use in a future story somewhere. Ral Zarek, odds of death 2 out of 3. If we assume the bad guys are gonna lose, then that means most, if not all of them, are going down. Ral is currently sitting on top of the Izzet League, which is named after Niv Mizzet. And Niv is out there and definitely wants to retake ownership of his own guild, so he's probably gonna make a pretty big example of Ral and do what has to be done to get his own throne back. The Kenrith twins, odds of death 0. They were introduced in Battle Bond. I don't think they're going to show up on Ravnica at all. We barely know anything about them, so safe. Saheeli, odds of death, probably another 0. I think she's safe on Kaladesh, introducing her new friend Huatli to all the mechanical life there. Maybe the two of them are working on some sort of magical Dinozords that combine into the coolest Gear Hulk that we will never get to see on a card. All right, back to the... Okay, no, but wait. Can you imagine how cool it would be if they did show up and start fighting Nicol Bolas, like in this giant citywide fight? 10-year-old Ryan would be so happy. Samut. Odds of death 2 out of 3. We haven't seen her since the after effects of Hour of Devastation on her home of Amonkhet. Although she might decide she wants to get revenge on Nicol Bolas for doing that to her home plane. So maybe she's one of those characters that shows up at the last minute to get their punches in. Sarkhan, odds of death 1 in 3. I think he's unlikely to show up and even less likely to die if he does, because dragons are really popular and designing a non-fire based red planeswalker is really hard. I also think that he'd rather just stay on Tarkir with Narset, but he does have a connection with Nicol Bolas, so we can't rule out that he might appear. Sorin, odds of death, he's stuck in a rock. Tamio, odds of death 1 in 3. Her good friend Ajani might convince her to come help the Gatewatch, but she's usually more of an observer and doesn't like to get actively involved in events. She just wants to record what happens. So if she's there and say the Eternals catch wind of her, they might corner her, and I don't know what kind of a fighter she really is. There could be a dangerous spot for Tamio to find herself in. We'll have to see. Teferi, odds of death 0. I think out of all the characters they brought back from Dominaria, he is probably the most safe. His powers are also kind of unique and very useful, and I think they're going to be relevant in future storylines, as I will touch upon in a minute. Tezzeret, odds of death, I'll say 2 out of 3. He's been Nicol Bolas' pawn for a really long time, and I think their fates are pretty much intertwined at this point. He's going to be a high priority target since he's carrying the Immortal Sun and the Planar Bridge, and I think his blue-black kind of space they're going to free up for Davriel when the time comes. Ugin. Odds of death? This is the biggest wild card yet. We haven't heard from him in a while, but if anyone's gonna show up out of the woodwork to fight Nicol Bolas, it has to be Ugin, right? I can't even give odds on his death because he's already a dead spirit dragon. But much like Tezzeret, I think his fate is tied really closely to Nicol Bolas. The two of them came into this world together as twins. They might just leave it together as well. Vivian, odds of death? 3 out of 3, and I am ready to defend myself in the comments. I think Vivian was created for 2 reasons. 1, to be the green planeswalker in M19 that has a connection with Nicol Bolas. And 2, to show up on Ravnica with her arc bow and take her shot at him and blow it. The gatewatch already has Gideon with the black blade, and now you've got Vivian with her bow, and I don't think you need both weapons to deliver the killing blow to Nicol Bolas. So more than likely, he gets to swat her down while saying something really cruel and powerful sounding like, "You were the last survivor of your plane and the first to die on this one. Ah, ha, 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 ha." This would be a great way to kind of set the stakes and show that characters are gonna die here on Ravnica. That brings us to Vraska. Odds of death? It pains me to say this, but I think 2 out of 3. Like, it's gonna be terrible if that's what Jace has to go through. Absolutely tragic, but I think it needs to happen. I bet he restores her memories and then she sacrifices herself to save the gatewatch somehow, and Jace pledges to remember her forever as a good person. And that's kind of fitting for him because his whole life up till this point has been defined by self-inflicted amnesia. Wow, that is it. That is every planeswalker who could possibly be involved in War of the Spark. To recap, I think Tezzeret, Dovin, Domri, Ral, maybe Vraska, and even Jaya are the most likely to die. Nicol Bolas and Ugin might also die or like merge into some mega super spirit dragon, I guess. Oh, and I think Vivian, maybe Tezzeret, will be among the first deaths, while Vraska and Jaya are the most meaningful deaths to the surviving characters. And if you want to join me in putting on a tinfoil hat, I will share with you my completely off-the-wall prediction. If Liliana does not die and become a lich, then I predict her path will go something like this. She will encounter Teferi on the battlefield and explain to him her situation. She tells him she doesn't want to fight her friends, but if she doesn't, she'll be killed by Nicol Bolas. Teferi is understanding and wise, so he offers to help by using his powers of time manipulation. Maybe Ugin or even Karn get involved here as well because they all have experience with time travel and time portals. Anyway, the point is, Liliana could go back in time and fight Nicol Bolas when he's younger and weaker, maybe even using the Chain Veil for a further advantage. If she can beat him in the past, she still has her immortality from the demon contract, so she could just live out the next several hundred years waiting for the timeline to catch back up. So there you go, that's my crazy theory for what happens in War of the Spark, but I want to hear your ideas too, so leave me a comment down below with your best guess. After that, make sure you like this video and subscribe to the channel so we can all laugh about how wrong I was in a couple of weeks. I'll see you then. Whatley's interesting because she didn't know she was a planeswalker because the Immortal Sun stopped her from ever leaving Ixalan until Tezzeret took it away. And then she made her first planeswalk and she showed up on Kaladesh. And she's like, oh my god, this place is crazy.
Oh my god! Fingers everywhere.
Yeah, it's a weapon called a Silex that just destroys everything. It was just sitting there in the dirt of Yavimaya until Multani was like, what are you doing digging around in my forest?
Well, I feel like that's what Karn would do. Well,
Needed this.
let's try this.